Hello, if I could get everyone's attention, please. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the launch of Soccology. I'm really excited to be here myself, so I hope you all are too. We've got the main man sitting on the sofa here, Kevin George. I'm going to be asking him some questions to start off with, and then I'll throw it to the audience and you can all grill him with your questions. I'm sure he won't mind. And then after Kevin, we've got a very special panel which will introduce themselves after. We'll have a short break, and after that, some more questions, and then you'll all have the chance to mingle, stay at the bar, get your dance on if you want, get in the groove, and also network, which I'm sure... Okay, so firstly, I'll just give a brief summary of Kevin. I'm sure most of you here know him. Kevin, so you've now labelled yourself the Soccologist, which I think is a really cool name. And Kevin, like myself, both former football players. One was a bit better than the other. I'll let you work that one out. So Kevin started off on the streets of South London, should we say? Went up to Sunday League and then made it as a professional footballer for both Charlton and West Ham. And now Kevin's going into Premier League clubs and giving development programmes from under 10 up to first team players. But Kevin, I'll let you tell the audience a bit more about that and exactly what's involved when you go into these football clubs. And also you've studied a lot. I mean, the list you gave me was quite long. I think, I ran out of ink trying to write them all down. So, Kevin, if you just want to tell everyone a bit more about your background and what you've studied and what kind of inspired you to write this amazing book.
To be honest with you, I think, even though I've done certain courses on human behaviour, I think the biggest thing for me on a learning curve was about reflecting on my own life in and outside of football. And what blew my mind is experiences that I had that loads of other players had as well. And as every year went by, I'd hear other people talking about their stories, their personal stories, and I'm thinking, well, hold on a minute, why isn't there anything out there to support the player in terms of their well-being? Or why isn't there anything to develop their football IQ? You know, we talk about game intelligence and all these things, but it's literally barked out from the side of the football pitch, but no one's actually developing these skills. So I thought that it was really important because to develop, improve player experience, but also for a club, it's a business. You can help them save millions and also make millions.
Was there a certain moment that sort of triggered something in your brain where you thought, I really need to write a book on this and help people understand?
I think I would say there's one moment that changed everything, and that was the head of welfare for the PFA, for those who don't know, the Professional Footballers Association, Michael Bennett. I don't think he's here today, but he was like, you need to do this counselling course. It blew my mind. You need to do it. And I did this level 1 course, and I was like, wow. And then from then, I jumped onto NLP, and I did all the other courses, and I started to read other books, and then it's almost like human behaviour became my new football pitch.
And why do you think this book was needed? Why do you think you needed to put it out there? And was it now in particular that you wanted to do it?
Not necessarily, but I'm happy I did, because I planned to do it about 7 years ago and it would have been so rubbish. But I wanted to do it because of, when I look at players that are misunderstood, I think it affects their lives and their families' lives. As I said, from the well-being perspective, I think football can do so much more to support the people that commit themselves and their family commit to the game. And I think football can give something back. I also thought that it was very important to educate themselves, to empower themselves so they do not become victim to the game. And then going on the art of football, I feel like, we kind of treat football like this game, like, you just go and play it or you just have these skills. Some people are luckily enough born naturally those skills, but I think that you can develop those skills. And luckily enough, I've got Professor Jocelyn Faubert, who created something called NeuroTracker, which is about the unconscious competence. So he's talking about, all of us in this room, how we got here today, or how our organs, work for us. We do it without thinking. But on a football pitch, players are doing that with the different complex situations that happen on the pitch. Some, as I said before, it comes naturally. But Jocelyn Faubert, what he done is he created a system that develops that in footballers. Man United have invested heavily in it, but because certain clubs are very secretive, i.e. Man U, you don't really hear about it. However, Southampton, they've also bought it as well. And they endorse it, and I used it. And I think those who follow me on social media, I posted it on there. It's brilliant. So these are the things that we talk about with football. We say footballers aren't intelligent, and I think, well, actually, they are super intelligent. You know, in terms of unconscious competence, in terms of situational awareness. So I want to bring light to that, but also to say, do you know what? If you aren't maybe as intelligent with regards to your teammates or other footballers, you can develop that almost like in the classroom. You know, you don't just settle. You keep revising and studying.
And firstly, talking of social media, you can all get involved tonight by tweeting using the hashtag Soccology, and it's at Soccology on Twitter, also Facebook, and on Instagram, but it's at Soccology1. But going back to your point, so this book is, you know, based around the mindsets of footballers, and you give deep and meaningful interviews in the book, which I've read, and I have to say it's really worth the read. But also, is this book beneficial to other people other than footballers if they're interested in reading it?
Massively. When I came out of football, I went into TV. I was doing, all I knew was football, so I was doing like commercials, films, everything to do with football. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, you know, it's all right money, but it's not regular work. So that's when I set up a company providing PPA in schools, and that developed into behaviour therapy. And I realised I really got, you know, I built a really good, strong relationship with the kids. Now, after I got over my ego trip, I started to look at, well, what is it that made me connect with these kids? And I started to realise that what teachers were missing. And so when I'm talking about, I mean, a lot of the elements in this book, you can take it across any walk of life, because we're talking about rapport, we're talking about leadership. I interviewed one of the partners from KPMG. We're talking about leadership in football, leadership outside of football, still leadership. We're talking about people's welfare, well-being. These are all elements, football IQ, EQ, emotional intelligence, all of these things, it can benefit you and allow you to see it in another way. And it's not just footballers, it's people who have an interest in football. You know, if you bring a topic or you change the conversation and you know, talk about it from a football angle, you might get through to people that may not want to speak about that in the first place.
Okay, I don't want to turn this into Soccer AM, but I'm going to come join you on the sofa. So, firstly, Kevin, can you talk me through the process of writing this book? Was it a long road? How did it sort of develop over time?
Started collecting notes 8 years ago, making notes, but I weren't serious. Anyone who's written a book knows it just drives you crazy, and I had so many things going on. So I kept making notes over the years. Any stories that I'd read in the paper, any stories that my friends would tell me, I would make the notes. And then in January 2017, I ended up delivering emotional literacy in Wandsworth Prison. And the lady I was doing a project with, she'd written a book, and I was fuming. I was like, right, that's it, I'm doing this book. And then that's when I started the book, finished it in July 2017. I said January before. Yeah, finished in July 2017. And then I realised once my editor edited the first chapter, and she'd done such a great job, I realised that the other chapters needed more. So I spent the next probably 7-8 months rewriting the whole book. So I finished it probably about like 6 weeks ago. So yeah, it's a long process.
But I mean, to interview all these footballers, you really have to build a rapport with them and have their trust. And I suppose, you know, you learn about things like that in the book. But you've interviewed players from the present, players from the past, some really big names. I have to ask you, who was the best person to interview? Who was the most interesting? Were there any interviews that really surprised you?
I think everyone's got a story, regardless if you're a footballer or not, but most of them interested me. I mean, there were players that I knew that shared things. I'm like, oh my God. And I tell everyone about probably my favourite chapter when it talks about how the streets and how gangs almost create the football character that all the clubs embrace. But in this chapter, I'll also show how, as much as the clubs embrace them, they do them a disservice and they don't understand how to treat them. And I interviewed Moses Ashikodi, who was at Millwall, and his story blew me away, because he started off with it, he was just like, you know what, Kev, yeah? He goes, when I touched in this country, he made me laugh. He's like, my brother was the only person I had in this country. He was meant to pick me up from the airport. Bearing in mind, he was 7 years old. He goes, when I touched down in this country, my brother went prison. So now he's a 7-year-old in England, he knows no one. And his brother had to ring someone from prison to go and pick him up, and then he ends up being on the streets by the age of 9 making £250 a week and so on. But it's so important because what Moses learned from really young on the streets of Wandsworth is he had to look out for himself the only way he knew how. And football didn't acknowledge that. There were so many clear signs. And then when he got into a fight at the age of 15, it affected his whole career. And I'm not going to go into it too much in the book. But this is really important because in football, there's a lot of things around attitude and behaviour and, you've got one more chance. But there's not enough around the support and well-being of people. It has improved, but I feel like I use that as an example. I hop out of football to show another example aligning it with Mike Tyson, and I hop back into football. And the main theme is attachment. But again, I'll leave that for you guys to read in the book.
Do you think people underestimate the environment and the support needed behind the players?
I don't think they underestimate. I think a lot of people in the environment are under a lot of pressure. And I think they don't understand it. When we talk about, for example, if we focus on mental health, every year we have that 1 week, and then I'm campaigning saying, listen, mental health is not mental illness. We always talk about, speak out, or do this, depression, anxiety, but we don't talk about well-being. And so I feel that in football, one, it's kind of token at the moment, and two, the people off the pitch need to have the same characters we want on the pitch. So we talk about bravery and courage, but at the moment in football clubs, you have a lot of people who are aware of the wrongdoings of players, but they're not brave enough. They don't have the courage to speak up or defend those players. So that's one of the issues we have at the moment.
And football's now an environment where you need to learn, you need to adapt, and it's important to change the mindsets of some footballers because now they go in at such a young age. Massively.
I mean, Gael Clichy, for me, his story was great. He spoke about doing yoga nidra, and he said to me that when he was at Arsenal, I think his first game after doing it was against Barcelona in the Champions League, and he said he had an absolute blinder. He said he never looked back since. But every time I speak to him, his mind is so set and is so focused that you can just tell he just lives an enriched life. And then he started to talk about football and the role models he had of Dennis Bergkamp and Vieira and how they saw football. It was a case of, do you know what, Kev? When we lost, because I learned it from them. They didn't carry that weight of, frustration or whatever it was throughout the week. That's what it was. And he, in terms of how he exercises, how he eats, and I made a bit of a mistake. I was doing all this promo and I kind of got his story muddled up with Fabian Delph. So Clichy's a vegan, Delph eats clean, but I kind of said that about Delph as well, and he started getting all these messages. He's like, Kev, you're killing me. Everyone, all these vegan people are like, yes, well done, brother, well done. And he's like, I'm not even a vegan. So, but yeah, so both of them are very mindful and very aware. And to be honest with you, like every time Gael talks, I always say, yeah, you need to get this out, you need to speak. And I can tell he gets frustrated with me, but I think with footballers, we always hear about how much they make. We always hear about all the other stuff. And, everyone keeps saying, they're role models. Well, let's hear the positives. Let's give him a stage to speak. Let's hear about Fabian Delph and his story. They've got unbelievable stories, but I feel like maybe, it's not interesting enough for certain people to publish.
There's a lot of pressure on footballers nowadays to be role models. A lot of them, go into it open-minded and there's certain things they have to do now as footballers because they are seen as role models. And we've seen that in the press recently with the likes of Raheem Sterling and other things going on. But, at the end of the day, they go there to play football, but they're having to learn as they go along.
Yeah, I mean, I always say, what qualifies a footballer to be what qualifies anyone to be a role model? If I'm being honest, because when you look at it, a lot of footballers, they go into football because they love football. They don't go into it as part of it being because of their behaviour. So if you come from a tough area, and as I said, the streets create some of the toughest footballers, all those values that you have, some will be great, but some might be negative. And you carry that into football. And if football doesn't educate you on how to on self-management, then actually you could be just doing a nonsense, And then people then turn around and point the finger at you and say, well, you're a footballer, you're a role model, you earn this amount. So it's about the education, And I think that's massive.
Yep. Okay, we're going to open this up to the audience now. So does anyone have any questions for Kevin?
Not all at once.
Queues down the street.
I'm seeing a lot of former players here as well, by the way.
I think
they should have their hands
someone
up.
waving at the back.
Benjamin, come forward. What percentage of footballers think is played in the mind? I think different specialists have different opinions, and by the way, I'm not talking about just footballs. In terms of unconscious competence, not unconscious competence. In terms of the unconscious, they say that it's 80% of how we navigate through life. So in terms of football, it'll be the same. But with football, and this is why it's so much more complex, and as you know from playing football, is that in one scenario, I could have the ball being passed to me, I have to be aware of which foot I'm going to use, which style of touch I'm going to use, where my teammates are, what movements are they making, where the opponents are, what they're going to do, and what am I going to do. So now I'm going to have, as you know, in the game they say you've got to have an image in your head, but I've probably got to construct 3 or 4 images. And then half a second later, the whole scene changes again. So in terms of the 80%, that's what's happening, and it's happening at such great speed. And this is why, to be an elite player, you have to be clever. You have to be. Because physically, when you look at footballers, a lot of them can do the same thing. It's all up in the mind. You know, when you look across the Premier League, what separates the top footballers? Yes, you've got the Eden Hazards or the Messis who've got a certain body where they're more agile. But when you look generally, most people have the same body. It's the decisions they make, and it's not just intelligence, because our emotions govern our intelligence. And we all know that socially or in our relationships, we end up doing some nonsense when we're not happy about something and then we regret it later. Yeah, and this is why emotional intelligence is so important in terms of performance on the pitch, off the pitch, at home, in our workspace. I hope that answered the question. Okay.
Yeah, any other questions?
Kevin, you said that it's not just for footballers, but what do you hope that people will take away from reading the book, or what do you hope that they will gain from reading the book? Why would someone buy your book and read it?
Good question. One of the main things is to create awareness. So one school I worked in, I remember a teacher saying, "Oh, these kids, you know, all they do is love football." And in my head, I thought, brilliant, you've got a gateway into their passion. So you can use football as a vehicle to get them to do anything. You know, if they're struggling with maths, you can, you know, do interdisciplinary education, combine PE with maths. So this is what I'm trying to say. It could be across anywhere. And I think, so different people, or whether it's a parent, this is a massive issue for me, where parents go to games. A lot of them say to me, all across the country, we feel like taxi drivers. So they go to the game, they watch their child, and then they go home. And then they say, "Oh, how are you feeling? How did it go?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's all right." And that's it. And I know, because I'm a male as well, you know, it's like, man, we're trained not to be in touch with our emotions, and we don't even know how to explain them. Now, for the parent, it's difficult, because how do you understand what's going on? So for me, this book is really important, because you get to understand and learn about the system. And I always say this, and it's funny because it gets coaches backed up, and I know there's a few in it. I always say that a football club or a coach does not have your best interest at heart. They mean well. I've seen a lot of coaches go out of their way for players, but they can't, because it becomes a conflict of interest. So when you're putting your child in that system, they have to understand. For the parents, it's a brilliant book for them to learn about the system. What's going on within your child? How do you pick an agent? What do you look for? I'm seeing the same mistakes happening over and over again. You know, what to look for in management, you know, because in all the interviews I've done in this book, there's only one that's anonymous, and that's from a parent. She didn't want to be named. She didn't name the club. But how her child was treated and how he got told that he wasn't getting a new contract was unbelievable. It was shocking. So that's 2 examples. You know, you've got leadership. Outside of football, in the corporate world, they can learn from the likes of Sir Alex Ferguson and Mourinho, little things that players who have played for both of them have given nuggets in the book as well. So, I mean, I can go through so many lists where outside of football, you know, you can benefit.
We're going to take a break in a minute, but before we do, is there any other questions for Kevin? Yeah?
Sorry, I have no idea this event was going on. I'm a guest of one of the members here. But like you said, like it's approachable to people who can take it from, like, it's not just people who are involved in football or people who don't necessarily have kids. Like, I do not think have any idea what it's like to grow up like in a street environment or anything. Like I came from a good background that I'm never gonna fucking apologise for, but my parents never gave me anything, and now I own 4 businesses. So then what, as someone who is like self-made, who doesn't, like what do I get from your book? Like, is your book not aimed at me, or is it like, I don't know, I just
Okay.
I
So
want to know where, like,
yeah.
I fit into your,
Okay.
into your book, because I think the story
Yeah.
is absolutely gorgeous.
Okay.
I could work for so many charities,
Yeah.
but from my point of view as a business person, I don't see where I fit into.
Well, there's a chapter on leadership. So for
Perfect. Okay, so you've answered my question.
yeah, yes, and there'll be other elements as well, and this is why it was important for me to hop out of football, and that's why I said that I interviewed one of the partners from KPMG, because what I was trying to show, and in football, some people can look at it and say, oh, well, you know what, that's the situation there, or that's not it there. But when you look at all the elements of the players who say, you know what, this is great, this manager made me feel great because of this, or this didn't work. What I did is I went outside of football and showed similar elements, but also showed stuff that maybe football misses. And so for yourself, you get now to read from different types of leadership from 2 different environments. Yeah, there'll be other stuff along the way as well, but that's just one example.
Okay, yeah, maybe that answers the question.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the gentleman over here has a question.
Thank you. Congratulations on the book, Kevin.
Thank you.
What has been your biggest challenge in putting the book together?
Oh, jeez, I don't know where to start. Do you know what it is? I think the biggest challenge was probably getting players to open up. I think because obviously they've got to trust you with their story. They get burnt so many times. And that's why I'm quite sensitive when I do interviews, because as I said, with the Fabian Delph story, they kind of went on a bit. I can't remember what they said, but they kind of spiced it up a bit. So straight away I was like, look, I didn't say that, da, 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 da. And he was like, no, don't worry, I've not read a paper for 3 years. But for me, it was like, I realized the responsibility that I have. And so I think the challenge is, one, is kind of getting them to trust me, even the ones I know, but also having that responsibility, even now, because now I'm going to start sending them the book. I'm like, I hope I've represented them right. Even though they've okayed the quotes, it's just making sure I tell their story the right way. Other than that, I think also just managing it whilst working, being married. To be fair, my wife deserves a trophy because as I said, I started in January and finished in July and rewrote it again. I did so many wrongs, but it's the big lesson. I'm definitely doing more books, definitely, but it will never be as stressful because it's the first time that I've done it.
Okay, last question before the break. The lady at the front.
Hi, Kevin.
Right.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, in terms of football and children with ADHD, especially other black kids, boys, say they've got ADHD, how do you see that benefiting them, getting involved in a sport like football?
Well, good question. It depends on what their interests are. So, for example, if that's something they enjoy, I mentioned, for example, before about interdisciplinary education. So I don't know how flexible a school might be or whether it's an alternative provision, because as much as I might say, okay, you can learn the benefits by linking football to something, that school might not have that flexibility. However, there's a massive current of mindfulness going through this book, regardless, and be able to see things from other people's point of view. So that's one of the things I would say, that you can take little bits from each chapter. And for me, I had my own awakening when I read this book called The Reason I Jump, written by a 13-year-old who had ADHD. And so I was like, wow, I thought I was doing a good service to the young people I work with, but I was actually doing a disservice. And so from what's what I look for? From a leader, so whether you're a teacher, again, it comes back into being more mindful. And as part of that, just bringing it slightly back to football, I interviewed about 5 of the top international footballers in the world at under 18 level. You've got Luca Ercolani at Man United, who plays for Italy in Man United, Matthew Dennis, who might be here today, he said he's coming, Arsenal in England, Besar Sabovic plays for Djurgården in Sweden, loads. And I asked them, what is the number one thing that you need to be successful in your career? And directly and indirectly, they said support. They need people to be aware and support them. So it doesn't matter if you've got ADHD or whatever it is, it's not really about you. You need a person who can actually see things from your map of the world and service you, not how they feel that it should be done.
Thank you. Some great questions there. We're going to take a short break, so if you want to grab a drink or anything else you need to do, yeah, we'll be back in about 10 minutes or so. Yeah. Hello? Sorry, can I just get everyone's attention a minute? Is Mustafa Carell here? No? Mustafa Carell? Yeah. Thank you. Could all the panelists please make their way to the front? Andy, I know you're here. Yeah, you can do. If Wayne Burnett could come to the front, Andy Ansah, Michael Turner. Terry Bowles. No, got one, two guests. Hey, nice to see you. Yeah, good, you? Are some not here?
No, so you've got Wayne Burnett. Tell them again, he's here.
Is Wayne Burnett here? Wayne Burnett?
Ansah, have you seen Wayne Burnett?
Yes, Wayne's at the back there.
If Wayne can make his way to the front, please.
No, Michael Turner.
And Michael Turner. See Michael Turner?
Mickey T.
It'll be a bit cozy, yeah. What are you going to do? No, I'm going to stand. If everyone could please make their way back to their seats where they were sitting before, we're about to start. Where's the second mic?
Just there, so you guys are impossible. I mean, Bosey, sorry. When you introduce him, just mention that you played for Arsenal before and you're playing in Tottenham. No, boy, you don't need to. The questions are open. They're open.
Okay, I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. If everyone could be quiet, please. Okay, if you want to start, just could everyone give a brief introduction of themselves for the audience and just pass the mic round.
Hello everyone, my name's Michael Turner. I'm currently a professional footballer, played for several clubs, playing currently at Southend United in League One.
Hi, my name's Terry Bowes. Started my football career at Arsenal, moved on to Ipswich. I'm now the England beach soccer head coach.
Hi, my name's Andy Ansah, former professional footballer and CEO, owner of Sports on Screen.
Hi, I'm Maggie, a personal and professional development coach, and also I feel like a thorn between all these beautiful roses.
Hello, my name's Wayne Burnett. I am a football coach.
Okay.
There might be some Arsenal supporters in here, so I've got to be careful.
I'm gonna say it for
I
you.
currently work for Tottenham Hotspur. Exactly. I currently coach the under-23s at Tottenham Hotspur. Yeah.
Okay. My first question is open to all of you. I just want to get all your opinion on the importance of Soccology, the book. So if you could all just give me a brief summary of why it's important to you.
I've known Kevin for some years now, and I met up with him recently, and we had a sit-down chat, and it just kind of highlighted how important that the psychological elements are, you know, and I think it underpins certainly elite performance, and I think it's key characteristics and traits that you need to certainly a high level performance, but and in most sports and in life, I guess. So yeah, vitally important for me.
Thanks.
Yeah, understanding mindset's massively important. Kevin spoke about mental well-being, in terms of mental health. And this book really raises awareness, because you can have the best technical skills in the world, but if you don't have the mental agility, then your game's not going to be the best that it can be. So it's having awareness of what the limiting beliefs that are holding you back, how you can blow them out, your state choice, your values, your beliefs. There's so much stuff that Kevin does cover in this book, and that's why it's so important. And that's why you can also take it out of football and across other fields into other concepts, because it's life skills as opposed to anything else.
For me, psychology is important, but I look at it from a different standpoint. I look at the debris that football leaves behind. And with Kevin, what he's done with this book, he's addressed a situation from someone who's experienced it and used testimonies and people's professional footballers' experience to tell the story. Now, there's a lot of people that fall behind in football and get left behind through football, literally because of a state of mind. And then they're labelled with things like, oh, wrong attitude, the wrong this, the wrong that, but no one ever addresses the state of mind. And I think, for me personally, this book is super, super important for people to understand and find the answers to why so many young players who are good and great players at 18, all of a sudden they become bad players. And that's what I think is really important about what this book really does.
I've only had a few snippets of the book, but I'm actually looking forward to learning a lot myself from it and giving to my players some of the information that I've seen already. So for me, it's a learning curve, really.
Yeah, again, for me, I'm really excited about reading the book. From what Kev said up here, sounds, so much information in there that I'm sure that if I'd have read the book when I was a youngster, I'm sure I'd have maybe taken my career on further. So again, yeah, I think there's a lot of mental health issues in football for players who fall out of the game and players who are in the game with the amount of decisions they have to make. So obviously it's a good reference point that people can read this book and get information from it.
Yeah, I agree with all your points there. My first question is to you, Wayne, so if you don't mind passing the mic over. So Wayne, how, as a coach, especially under 23s, where you've got young players who are maybe dealing with external factors outside of football, and you're managing all those different attitudes, all those different players that come from different backgrounds, are you faced with some difficulties? Do you have to deal with each player differently depending on their personalities?
Yes.
Could you give us a bit more of an insight into that?
I've just been talking at the bar, and I think that you have to try and understand these young individuals now. We talk about challenging, and Kev talked about support. I think it's key. The landscape has changed. They have so many different obstacles in their way. They have so many different influences in their life, and it's really, really difficult. And I think the key for me is trying to build relationships with these young players. And what's vitally important is to try and gain their trust. I think if you can't gain these young players or young people's trust, it develops uncertainty, and it doesn't matter, certainly the industry I'm in, the X's and O's and the technical and tactical aspects of the game do not matter one bit if you don't have the trust of these young players. So it's really about, for me, it's about building relationships, but challenging them on a day-to-day basis, but being there with as much support as I possibly can give them, and I think that's the important part.
So would you say, nowadays as a manager, you're not just acting as a manager, you've got, a variety of different roles, and you have to maybe adapt yourself as well as them adapting to the environment, you as a manager? I
think you have to have flexibility in your thinking. The game is a continuation of complexities. There's so many things that are going on within the game, on and off the pitch, and you have to be adaptable. You have to be, because they're all different and they come from very different environments. They come from very different backgrounds, and I think that if you don't get to understand them and you don't build relationships with them, it's very, very difficult for them to trust you and to take them forward. I've literally been in this role that I've been in for just under 2 years now, and I'm still building relationships with these young players. Some quicker than others, some not as fruitful as others. But it's a long journey, and as I say, the landscape's changing. We have to find strategies to understand these young players.
Yeah, so I think for these young 23-year-olds, I suppose reading the experiences of the people that Kevin has interviewed for this book, the ones that have made it to the top and had to deal with different challenges, that could really help these young players.
100%. You know, as I said, Kevin came in to the training centre and visited us recently, and we was talking about building relationships, and he said something that stuck with me that I haven't told him. That he said that I said, you know, we talked about building relationships with these young players, and he said, but what you have to do, you have to let them understand you a little bit better, because without that, there won't be any trust within the relationship. But I think that some of the experiences within the book and the players, the ex-players and the players talk about, I think are vital. But it's just getting them to believe that, because every player who's 18, 19, 20, 21 thinks their career is going to go on forever. I thought I could play forever.
Thank you. My next question is to Andy. Now, Andy, you work with the most phenomenal football players in the world, the very best, the Ronaldos, the top elite players. I've got two questions for you. One, what have you noticed that's different in their mentality to maybe players who aren't as skillful as them? But also, I want to know your secret. You seem to have a great relationship with these players. You seem to have a real understanding, they trust you, and you work really well with them. So I'm sure everyone here wants to know, what is your secret?
I think for me the secret is I treat everybody the same. I treat people as equals. And I first and foremost see you as a human being. And I think the difference is, yes, I play professional football, so I understand the game, but I treat them as human beings, and they're nothing but human beings. And so our conversations with Cristiano will be about changing the baby's nappies. Now he's got 4 kids. It's like, do you you're changing nappies? No, I don't. So it's basic conversations. And with that, I'm loyal. I've always been loyal. So it's about being able to trust, going back to what Kevin touches upon and what Wayne touches upon, is that there's a loyalty and there's a trust. There's a trust there, and they know within me, with Cristiano Ronaldo, it's the easiest one to start with. It's 14 years, the relationship is. And it's total trust. The same with Wayne Rooney, with Ronaldinho, all these guys, it's all based on trust. But I think when you talk about the traits of these top footballers, I can, without talking too deep, if you go to someone like Wayne Rooney, single-minded, very single-minded, irrespective of what was going on around, single-minded and driven. Cristiano Ronaldo, from first shoot he ever done was 2004 together. And I asked him, what we're going to call you? And he said, Ronaldo, I'm going to be the best player in the world. And the week before that, I shot Ronaldo Phenomenon. So imagine now you're going to shoot a kid who says, call me Ronaldo, I'm going to be better than Cristiano Ronaldo. You're saying, no way. But he wanted that pressure because he knew he was going to be the best player in the world. And he was 19, 20 years old when he said that.
Do you think there is a certain element, and people have spoken about this, about the likes of Jose Mourinho, when you go somewhere and you say, hi, I'm the best, that you then change everyone's mindset and you make them believe that you are the best?
I think that in football, you become arrogant. People will look at you as arrogant to say that. Believe it or not, if I get most people say, what's Ronaldo like? He looks arrogant, he's this, he's that. Maybe he has 5 or 6 friends. He's just single-minded, driven, and works hard for what he wants to get. So I don't think it's the right thing to do to go around and say, I'm going to be this, but it's the mindset to have to say I'm going to be that. Because if you go around saying it, people just call you arrogant. But if you're saying what you're going out to do, does that really make you arrogant? It doesn't. But in the world of football, everyone's judgmental. How many people actually really talk about the work that these top players do? If you look at Ronaldinho, he was a great talent, but did he do enough work, the other side of it, to maintain that talent and to stay at the top? If you look at the things he's won, they're nowhere near as much as Cristiano Ronaldo. But we can have an argument here, and I can say to you for a fact, the most talented player I've ever worked with is Ronaldinho. But he's not got as many accolades as Cristiano Ronaldo, so you ask about the work rate. And there's a history for that if you look through Brazilian footballers. And I think one of the only footballers who's looking to break that is Neymar, and that's backed by his father, and he's keeping a close rein on him. So when he was in Barcelona, his dad's got everyone around him. It's a tight team around him. Same thing's happening now in Paris. It's a tight team. And he's seen the trends, what's gone on before, so he's creating stability to make sure his son doesn't go off the rocks and get sort of distracted by the other side of football. And yet again, that is having people around you to understand you and support you, like Kevin mentioned earlier, on that journey. So maybe Neymar will break that mold in terms of a Brazilian having longevity.
Now, I don't want to give away too much from the book, but I did read a part about Cristiano Ronaldo, where he was doing a drill in the dark and the ball was coming to him, and he...
That was my cross, by
that
the
was,
way.
That was your cross. So he brought the ball down with a first touch in the dark. Do you think players like that who practice day in, day out the same things, they're better footballers maybe in terms of their mindset because they don't need to think about so much? It comes naturally to them.
Yes, I think anyone who's a footballer in there, Mike, Terry, Wayne will tell you that things become second nature. You do it so many times that what comes naturally it just happens in football. Like Kevin mentioned about all the scenarios you go through when you receive a ball as a footballer. But when you retire and you receive a ball as a footballer, you don't know what you're going to do. But whilst you're playing, it's just a natural thing. So for someone like Cristiano Ronaldo, these top players, it's just it's repetitive and it's an understanding. And the key thing is when we did that program with Cristiano Ronaldo and broke down his body, he didn't realize certain things that he does naturally. We did this eye tester on him and he didn't realize that when a player moves his hips, he does a trick. So he just focused on the player's hips and then he does a trick. So these are things that footballers do not realize. It just comes naturally to them.
Thank you. My next question is for Terry. So, yeah, follow that one up. Terry, I have to say, so you played for Arsenal, but if you don't mind me saying, you didn't quite make it into the first team. When you look at the players around you, maybe the likes of Ashley Cole, who did, would you say, in terms of skills, you were maybe the same? Do you think that it does come down to mentality and certain aspects in order to make it to the first team? What's your opinion on that?
I think Andy just touched on it there, and especially with Ashley, it was his work rate. His work rate was phenomenal, and that's why he went on to be the best left back in the world. But it's also, again, Kev's talked about support, but it's having them people around you. So for him, it was quite simple. Give the ball to Vieira, give it to Henry, and just run. So football's, it's... I don't know what I was going to go off onto there.
But now you play beach football. So that, I guess, diversifies your thinking. With the sand, there's different elements with which part of the foot you use. And again, you can relate it to football. What social differences maybe have you noticed with beach football?
Yes, totally different game. Obviously, it's five-a-side and it's on sand, but I think a lot of the things have been touched on. A lot is in the mind. A lot is in, a lot of people come to play beach soccer and they'll say, I can't do this, it's too hard to run on sand, and other people, it's just natural, and it's a mind thing a lot of the time with it. So.
Okay, and talking about the mind, the perfect person is up here for this. Maggie, I'm coming to you next. So just give everyone a bit more of an insight into your role, because yours isn't specifically football. It's, using the mind as a tool, which Kevin talks about in the book, because you really get into the mindset of the players, and you can see the deepness of it, the meanings of it. But, tell us about how you can change the mindset, because we were speaking about it earlier and I was really intrigued to what you had to say. So if you could just sort of replicate that to the audience, because I think they'll find it just as interesting.
It's going to intrigue you all. We've touched on it here, that the belief system really is absolutely key in terms of mindset. So you mentioned there about the beach, playing beach football, and that I can't play on sand. And actually, in terms of changing mindsets, it's actually just a few little tweaks. It's not as complicated as people think it will be. It's just shifting your belief system. We have filters that we see the world through, which usually are created from when we're small, but they could be at any stage throughout life. Somebody could just make a passing comment to you and boom, you've now got that in your mind, and that's how you see the world. So if you can find out what that is, if you take an interest, as you were saying, you take an interest in the person, build that rapport as you were talking about, then people will open up. Kevin was talking about emotional intelligence, and that's absolutely key in terms of the mindset. Kevin's got a wicked little tool in the book, which is a model that you can use in terms of neurological levels of change. And it's about aligning, so it's not just the skill set that you have, so it's what environment are you in, what are you doing, how do you think, what are your skills and capabilities, and then you move up to the transformational stuff, which is about the belief system. So, do you believe you can play on sand, for example? Do you believe you can't? What would happen if you could play on sand? And then your identity as a player. What's your identity? Do you believe you're the best in the world? Because that makes a massive difference. And then what's your mission and purpose in life? Because if you don't believe in what you're doing, what's the point? So mindset's a little bit important in football.
But how difficult is it to change people's beliefs? Because if they're set on thinking one way, how hard is it to change that? And, especially footballers, they go through, you'll be able to talk more about this, go through different times where, it's not all a straight line. It's 1 minute it's going really well for you and, you're full of confidence. The next minute something might happen, injury, and you're feeling low. So, what are the difficulties that you're faced with?
I think one of the key things is getting people to realise that they can change in an instant. It sounds like a cliche, but you really can. Think about any life experiences that you've had, and you might have had a really strong belief system about something, and as you said, in an instant something can change in a game, or anything can happen, and your whole world can be like flipped upside down. So I'm going to go into the theme tune of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air then. But it can completely flip upside down. And if you can change that from external circumstances, then you can change that any time you want. It's just being aware that you can do that. And as I said earlier, it's actually really simple little tweaks. Think about what you believed when you were 5, and then think about what you believed when you were 16, and then when you were 30. They're going to be different things. So things naturally change and evolve. So if you can do that naturally, why not do it consciously?
Definitely, yeah. I believed I was going to be in Coronation Street when I was 5. Michael, just best till last. No pressure. Michael, just sort of carrying on from that, has there been anything, during your playing career where something's triggered and you've just completely changed your mindset maybe towards something going on in football?
I think obviously losing games of football is always a challenging one. I think you can win so many games and you can lose a game and your mindset immediately changes. You come in the next week to training, sometimes the manager's different with you, with the whole team, so you have to sort of deal with all that. I think getting injured as well, getting injured is a big one really, because I know a friend of mine actually played for a Premier League club last year and he got injured, bad knee injury, and the manager completely sort of forgot about him, didn't even talk to him. So for him, that was obviously a challenge for himself to get over his injury, and of course, try and build again a relationship with the manager and get himself back into the team.
I suppose when players are faced with injuries, they must feel isolated, and it's important not just with them, but with the people around them, their teammates, that you give them that support and make them still feel like they're part of the team. Yeah,
I think that's what's hard. I think as a player, being a footballer, that's what people love. I think when players retire, that's what they miss, the dressing room and the camaraderie between everyone. And I think when you're injured, you're out of that a little bit. Obviously, you're not involved on a Saturday. You're at the training ground every day, but you're still not on the training pitch. You're probably in the gym with maybe 1 or 2 others. So it's dealing with that situation as well. That is very tough.
And last question from myself before I open it up to the audience, and that would be, in my opinion, football is changing. That might be now with the money involved. Do you think with that come just extra pressure on these players, and now there's a lot more that players maybe have to deal with?
Yeah, I think so. I think with social media, I think it's changed a lot since I first started playing football. There's so many more challenges for a player to deal with. And again, I've come back to it. It's obviously mindset is key, I think, to get yourself through it and obviously improve that side. And obviously with the book and psychology, I think if you can improve that, then you give yourself more of a chance of being a better player.
Yeah, I do think if maybe players that are coming up now, reading this book, it can be really helpful because of the experienced players you've spoken to. So I definitely think that would be a key factor to help players now. So I'm going to open it up to the audience. If you want to speak to any of these players and ask them a question, if you want to, I'll pass this mic up. Has anyone got a question? No? Come on, someone must have a question.
Oh, I'll ask it.
Yeah.
How do you think Raheem Sterling is dealing with the criticism he's getting about his tattoo? He wants to be a player. He didn't say, "Oh, I'm going to be a role model." He just wants to be a player. I love football.
To be fair, Raheem is a strong-minded young man, and he's got good support around him, despite what the media say about him. So he's strong-minded. If you look at him, he's just recently launched a YouTube channel, so he's not running away from nobody. He's put himself out there. So he's one of them kids as well. He tends not to read what people write about him. He's got a strong team around him, and that's who he leans upon in times of need, like now. And if you look at the game on Saturday, irrespective of what the commentators were saying about him, if you look at how many players went towards him when he done the assist for Harry Kane, you can see the team are around him. He's a strong figure in and around the England camp. And when I look at it, how many would I have been able to deal with that as a footballer? The whole nation constantly attacking me? The answer is no. I think I would have lashed out, but he's got that support which Kevin talks about. That's why he's able to still go out there and do what he's got to do. So I think we should take our hats off to him and hope he does really well during the World Cup and does well for England. But it is really harsh, the treatment he's getting.
I'll just let the audience think of a few more questions, but I've just got one quickly for you, Michael. There was a time in your career where you went to Inter Milan. Can you tell us about the cultural differences?
Yeah, well, they do things totally different. Obviously, we train in the morning here, and in the youth team, certainly, you have a day at college or an afternoon at college. It's every morning you go to college or school, and then in the afternoons you train. So that side of things was completely different. But for me, that was my first experience of first team environment, a full-time environment. So I left school and went to that. So I didn't know too much about what happened when I was at Charlton at the time. So it's all a new learning curve for me. So although it's different to what they do here, obviously it's something I had to sort of adapt to.
Thanks. Any more questions from the audience?
Yeah. I was wondering if you guys, obviously everyone's talking about football. Is there anything that you find different that makes football distinct from any other sport?
I know Kevin mentioned it. He talks about. I hear it a lot. Footballers are thick and they don't really understand and they don't get this and they don't get that. But I think I see a lot of coaches now and certainly a lot of players that have diversify and are really smart young people. And I sometimes I don't think we give them the credit that they deserve, and I don't think that we need to enhance this rather than hinder it. There's some really smart young people out there, and we just have to understand them a little better. I think that the football industry can give a lot in terms of leadership and how people go about leading and about how people behave within the industry. So there's a lot that I think that certain businesses can learn from the football industry. It's a tough industry, football. People think, oh, you turn up and, you earn lots of money, and some people do, but it's a tough industry with a lot of sacrifice, a lot of discipline. And I think that the other industries, like I say, I know I'm repeating myself, but I think industries can learn a lot from the football industry, for sure.
Any other questions? Yeah, you at the back.
Do you feel, as well as educating the players about mental well-being, it's also vital to educate the coaches at the grassroots level as they're being nurtured from the ground up? I think that's important.
Sharing. Personally, I think it's massively important because it's talking about belief systems, and coaches really can make or break a player in terms of their belief systems. They can either bring them up and support them and help them believe in themselves, or they can completely tear them down. Not just on coaches, but anybody in that kind of authority kind of position. So it's huge. They need to also learn how to manage and maintain their own state as well, so that they're not bringing their own stuff into a game. Because you can imagine if something's going on at home or something like that, and you bring it to the game, same with the players, it can massively impact how they treat the team, how they respond to the players, and vice versa, and that can massively affect their performance on the pitch. Do you want to add to that?
I think it's major. I had it down on one of my notes about the book with regards to the people that it can affect. And we talk about coaches and we talk about psychology. I remember the late, great, I'm going to say, Dermot Drummey. He started at Arsenal Football Club and he took these kids. It was Jack Wilshere, Benica Phoebe, J. Emmanuel Thomas, Emmanuel Frimpong. All these kids were seen as outcasts, but they were great footballers. He actually got them internal, took them out of school, and was teaching them in the training ground at Arsenal, over at Haylen. He was the first person I saw that, I remember talking to him saying he was like a social worker. He was their coach, he was like their dad, but he took time to understand them. And most of those players I've just mentioned have all gone on and done something great. Dermot went on from there to go and work at Chelsea Football Club and brought through the likes of Nathan Aki, Lewis Baker, all those Chalaba, all those players all went on and become successful. From there, he decided to go on and become a football manager of the first team himself. He went to Crawley. Worked under some tough circumstances. This is last year. He was in the job less than a season, lost his job. Who did he have to talk to? Who was working with his state of mind? And the rest of it we know. He hung himself. He committed suicide through the game of football. This is a man who supported so many people, but where was his support? So when I look at what Kevin's done, I applaud you, Kevin, because there's every single person out there can benefit, and I'm using football, but it's life. And I look at Dermot, and even in my head I say, what if Dermot had access to this then? What if somebody worked with the coach's state of mind? Where would we be now? And how many people are doing what Dermot did and giving these young kids a career? So it's not just a job. I'm going to take my time out. I'm going to come to your house. I'm going to do this with you. I'm going to do that with you. But look what the outcome was. The input was he lost his own life. He took his own life. But I think this book is so helpful for so many people, whether you're a player, whether you're a coach, whatever walk of life you work in.
Yeah, go on.
Follow on for that question. My thoughts was that changing people's mindset is key. But as a football coach, wouldn't you then, to try and impose that into changing a culture in the football team, wouldn't you have to convince the managers that that's something you want to incorporate? Would they say, if you had to spend money on it, would they say to you, what are the benefits and how could you quantify that if the benefits are intangible?
We talk about, so before we talk about making good footballers, we talk about making good people. So the key for us, I work for, I'm very fortunate, I work for a fantastic manager, Mauricio Pochettino, and he's a really good guy, a really warm guy. But first and foremost, he will allow mistakes to happen, but he wants character, he wants good people, he wants passionate people, he wants people that are warm, he wants people that show humility, he wants people that show gratitude, he wants people that show empathy, he wants all of those characteristics and traits, because that's the most important thing for him. So, do we invest enough in it? Probably not. Do we expect, someone spoke about being a role model, why should Raheem Sterling be a role model? How should he know about being a role model when he's got all this money and all these people telling him how great he is? He's never been, he's gone from Liverpool to Man City, and people are telling him you're this, you're that. Why should he be a role model? How does he know? How does he understand how to be a role model? The only way the reason why he's dealing with it so well, is like Andy said, is because he's got great support around him. Do we invest in it enough? Probably not. But we need to understand these young individuals, these young people, these young players, and understand them better in order to help them.
Thanks. Really sorry, we don't have time for any more questions. So if everyone could give a round of applause to the panel. Sorry, you'll be able to grab them after maybe for a quick word. If I could just bring Kevin back up to the stage. Sorry, thanks for you guys. If you could just to wrap things up. Yeah, question.
So first of all, in the book, it was funny because I thought, do you know what? I'm staying away from women's football because I feel like men always take control of things, and I thought it'll be a bit funny for me talking about women's football. I don't really know anything about it. However, I did step in slightly because there's 2 female footballers that I know quite well, and there's a particular reason why I interviewed them. In terms of opportunity, I feel that in general you have to put your money where your mouth is. So the women's game is growing, but I feel that for it to grow even further, I think, for example, Sky and the other news channels probably need to cover it more. I feel that maybe in the press we can start reporting about it more, because then I think money will then go back into the game, and then it will invest in the grassroots. I think it's doing great, but it can do a lot better. So I hope that answered your question. But I feel as though, as I said, I purposely didn't go into it in the book. I've got 2 female footballers, but as I said, I feel like I'm a guy that's not been in the game. Who am I to then go and talk about it, you know? I think in the second one, I'll definitely do that. I think I'll do that, but I'll get them to lead the conversation. Yeah? All right, so we're going to wrap it up there. I hope you're okay with that. But I've got a few thank yous before we wrap up. I want to say thank you to Fiona Tankard. That's my editor who's in Italy. She gets like 1 million emails, especially, as I said, I rewrote the whole book, so she wasn't happy with me at one stage, and she worked, I don't want to say that, but she just worked hard. Pippa Hancock, where are you, Pip? Oh, there you are, yeah, I didn't even see you, I was looking over there as well. Pip's been doing so much work for me on the side, really appreciate it. The contributors and the panelists. The contributors, I mean, I was moaning about the work. Some of the interviews, I mean, some of the guys are in other countries, they, you know, it was like 2 hours long. I was moaning about transcribing 2 hours worth of an interview, but they took up, you know, they took that time out to give to me, and I think I really appreciate that. And also sharing themselves with the world, I think is massive. Steve Payne and John Thompson and Maggie, who was up here. I know Maggie because I studied, when I did my NLP actually, Maggie worked for the organisation, and then she went on to be a trainer in neuro-linguistic programming, and she's great, that's why she's here today. Also with Steve and John, they taught me how to be teachers, but what it is I was so drained and tired in their classes, but I had so much fun. And it made me realise that actually I could spend the whole day laughing whilst learning. And I took that on board, and when I go into places, engagement is key, and I feel like once I've got that, that's the bridge to the message that I want to give to the other people. My first manager, Kelly, at Moonshot, it was so unorganised, it was funny. I played in a team of guys 4 years above me, but it was almost like he was a social worker. In Newcastle at the time, it wasn't the best place to be where I was growing up, and a lot of people were doing badness, but he was that guy. He looked out for us. And there's a lot of guys who came from Moonshot, most recently Reece Nelson, but it's not the same now. You had Dean McDonald, Gavin Tomlin, the list is long of footballers who came from there. And then you've got the people I came up with, Kevin James, who's here. Kev? Fake Kev, there you are. Gavin Tomlin and Craig Rocastle. Gav's just flying out the country. Craig now lives in Kansas because that's where his last football team was. But those guys were in my environment. I do a chapter on environment and how powerful it is. I would not have got into football if it wasn't for them. And we go into the details of that and how we support each other to get in that, in terms of the technical aspect, the emotional aspect, everything. So them, my mum, Ange. My mum, it's funny, she taught me how to be a footballer without having any interest in football, because I was always taught never to settle. I mean, I've written a book in school. If you brought a book to me, it was like kryptonite. I would have jumped out the window, and I'm writing a book. And so for me, I never settle. I'm always pushing boundaries, and it's because of my mum. She's always given me that push or that freedom to never settle, you know. And I always see it in her life. She didn't tell me, sometimes I would just see it. You know, someone does something she's not happy with, she's like, no. So, and my wife Jessica, geez, I know. Listen, all I can say is I'm sorry. I wrote from January to July and rewrote, so it was like a whole year having a passive marriage. So. I appreciate it. It won't happen again for the others. And thank you all for coming. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Network, party. If anyone wants a book, they're going to be over there with Jessica. We're going to have networking, and then we're going to put some music on to Boogie in about 30 minutes.